Okay. Welcome to another week of Grieving Voices. If you're new here, thank you for tuning in. And if you've been around a while, thank you as well. Today, my guest is Dr. Victoria Shaw, and we are going to be talking about all sorts of stuff regarding theories, tools, techniques, her grieving story, of course, and also a little bit of the woo, and which excites me. So, Victoria, how about you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So, I am an intuitive counselor and coach, and my journey, my story is that about 15 years ago, I started to I felt like a longing in my life. I felt like there was something was missing. There was something I was supposed to be doing that I wasn't doing, and I didn't know what it was. And at that point, I had left a career in academic psychology. I had done some book writing, um, which is something I always wanted to do. I was in the thick of being a mom, mostly stay at home mom at this point, but I just kept feeling this deeper longing, this deeper question that there was something else I was supposed to do. And because at that time too, my kids were pretty complicated and they were both struggling with different things. And those different things brought me a little bit further and further out of that left-brained mainstream box of how things should be done. And I started seeing intuitive healers and medical intuitives and energy workers and all sorts of things. And I started to just have my mind expanded more and more to these kinds of tools that maybe were not in my left brain, Western trained toolbox. It was on that path that I discovered that I had this gift of intuition. And intuition is something we all have. It's that kind of knowing that you have, that's not something you've been taught. It's not that something you can explain with your logical mind, but it's something where you know it's true. You don't know why you know, but you're 100% right. And everyone has an experience with their intuition. But it's not something that's talked about a lot in our society, and it's not something that most of us have been taught to nurture and taught to use. And for me, that intuitive call was really strong. Oftentimes, my intuitive information borders on what people might call psychic, or like sixth sensory. And I realized I'd had this gift my whole life. I had the ability to get guidance for people. I had the ability to know things about people that I had no business knowing. I was a feeler, so I could feel what other people were feeling. But because I didn't have a frame of reference for understanding it, and because it was so strong and I wasn't using appropriate boundaries, I was sort of overwhelmed and I'd kind of lost touch with the giftiness of the gifts. And so this all started a journey for me to connect with my intuition and really develop it and turn it back into the gift that it's meant to be. And now what I do is I use my intuition to support others in doing the same and tapping into their own inner resources and their own inner wisdom, so that they can get the most out of this human experience. So
I love that. I love
that's
it.
me in a nutshell.
Do you feel like, because I'm a feeler, I
Mm-hmm.
feel things deeply, and working with, I used to be a CNA in a nursing home and did hospice, home health care, things
Wow.
like that. And so you can definitely feel without
Yes.
things even needing to be said. I could. And I just did not feel uncomfortable sitting with people in their grief, even though I myself am a griever. And maybe, do you feel like when you consider yourself or know yourself to be a griever, do you feel like that's when we kind of, I don't know, like, do you feel like, I'm not sure what I'm trying to ask here. I know what I'm trying to ask, but I'm just so excited about this conversation. I feel like my intuition was kind of cut off in a way from my grief because of my grief. But at the same time, I would feel things with people and I didn't understand why that was.
Yeah, you're saying a bunch of different things. No, it's good. It's good. It's good. I'm going to try to unpack them if I may. Look, I think especially people doing end of life work and that kind of care, it is such a beautiful gift to hold the space of, this is how it comes through to say enlightenment, light, joy, peace, eternity, like with people that are passing over. And knowing that even though that grieving process is so hard, and even though everything about our human existence tells us that death is the end, it's not the end. It's just a transition. It's a transformation from one state of being, your human state, to another state of being where you'll just be, an energy, spiritual being again. But holding people through that process is so powerful. And my read is, and I hope that I can share this, and if not, I hope you have a good editor. I think that's a gift that you have, to hold people through that space and to hold the light through people through that space when they are grieving. And I think that's a beautiful gift. I think it's a gift that you came into this physical lifetime with. And I think your own personal grief experiences have actually helped you with that. They've helped you understand, even if you're not always understanding that with your brain, your viscerally, your body knows that there's something to be gained through this process. Okay, so I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I just want to share briefly an experience that I just wrote about not that long ago. I think it's for a post coming up, but so 30 years after my dad passed, and I was 8 when he passed away, I had this inner knowing when I found out his only living sibling, or his brother, was dying of a brain cancer. He was in the hospital. They didn't know how much time he had left to live. I hadn't seen him since my dad's funeral. We were pretty much cut off from that side of the family. And I had this inner feeling that I needed to go see him, even though I hadn't seen him for 30 years. I didn't know if he'd recognize me. He was diagnosed with brain cancer. I didn't know if he'd recognize me, what that experience would be like, anything like that. And I opened the hospital room door and it was just this, I can't even, it was like magic. It was just this magical healing moment for, I think, both of us. And not 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and here it was, his daughter, one of his daughters, and a cousin I didn't even remember meeting as a child, who they live like across the country,
Right.
in the neighboring state. And so that's where I was like, wow, it was just a powerful experience for me. And I really want the listeners to understand, or to what I want them to hear in this, is that we always do have that intuition, like you said, and
Right.
it's just listening to it and it's being open to it. And I want to know, tell us how you came to do this work. I know you said it was a medical intuitive, but what led you, what was going on in your world? What was the grief that you then were told that you had to work through?
Well, I was telling you the story before we got on air, so I'm going to tell you again a little bit, because I think that's the best way to do it. So in the process of working with my kids and being introduced to all these different, out of the box healers, my pediatrician, believe it or not, sent me to this medical intuitive. And so she was mostly asking questions like, did somebody have Lyme disease, or what are some good supplements to treat my son's ADHD? But in the process and working with me, she said, that it tested that I had this grief. And I, was like, what? I don't think I even had lost my grandmother yet. I lost my grandfather when I was young, but those big T trauma griefs were not something that were part of my life. And I was really like racking my brain over, what do you mean grief? And she said, well, it could be a loss of she said it was a loss of a sacred beloved. That was the word that came through. And I was like, and she's like, well, that sacred beloved could be a part of yourself. And I was like, whoa, hey, oh my gosh, yes. And that was a big catalyst on my journey, because I really thought about, the parts of myself that I had left behind when I was in high school. And I had certain dreams and ideas of how I wanted my life to work, and that sense of agency that we all have at that age when, the sky's the limit and you have these big dreams. I realized, wow, I forgot about those things. And also just my professional identity too, because I had been, someone who, I'm an Ivy League trained research psychologist, and I was doing my postdoc at Columbia, and I had, so I had this big professional persona that I really left behind because A, I didn't love doing it, and B, I wanted to focus on having my family. But all of those threads were still, they were longings, they were losses. And so it was part of the steps that I took to, investigate and work on those losses that led me to the work that I'm doing now. She actually sent me to an astrologer. Believe it or not, it took me about 3 years before that actually happened. From the time that that she identified I had this loss of the sacred beloved, which I think was parts of me, to seeing the astrologer. But the astrology reading was like one of the most powerful experiences of my life because she read my chart, and I don't, you maybe don't believe in this stuff until it happens to you, but she literally told me, based on my birth date and the time I was born and where I was born, right? All of my hopes and dreams and all of those things that I had, thought were the case about myself when I was in high school and what I wanted to do with my life, she validated every one. She was like, well, that's your life's purpose. That's why you're here. And it was just like, and so it really did bring me home to that beloved self, that part of myself. And it was, that was the catalyst for me moving forward on my own healing and development journey to do the work that I do today.
I love that story. I love that story, how it all came about, how you kind of found your way back to you, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like for me, it's just only starting to happen. And in the last 5 years or so, I actually had my palms read.
Oh, cool.
And a lot of people that know that, because I was so desperate to just, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? Why am I not fulfilling this? Like you said, it's like this. I was a work at home mom or stay at home mom too. I did things on the side, but I was always home with my kids, and I just had this deeper longing too. Like, I'm meant for more, and there's more to life than just this. And I don't mean to, not just this as far as being a mother, but I just felt a deeper knowing that there was more gifts that I had that I wasn't expressing.
And I think a lot of moms feel that way, especially in our culture and society, right? But I also think, like, whenever we go through an identity shift, there's a loss. And so, anyone who has kids knows, right, that when you become a mom, everything about your world changes, like, in a big, profound way. And there is, that part of myself before I was a mom that's like, wait, hold on, what happened to me? And I think every single mother goes through this to some extent. And it's about remembering you're still you too, and that we don't have to, go headlong into that, identity of a mom, but also, the way our society is set up and a lot of the tasks and things that we have to do as a parent, especially if you decide to become a stay-at-home mom where you lose, you lose one identity maybe to gain another. It's tricky. And it's about valuing yourself through the process, valuing your choices. Because I think, sometimes motherhood is not, it's something when you're pregnant, I remember everybody comes up to you and tells you, is so excited that you're having this baby and you get so much attention. And then when you have the child, it's just like, you go into the background, right? It's like, moms aren't important. Moms, and so we have to learn, I think. And I think there's a lot of shift towards this, how valuable the role of mothering is, but also that you don't have to sacrifice and sublimate your entire self to this process of raising your offspring, because I think that's really disempowering and unfortunate and woefully unnecessary.
And that sparked a thought in me as I was hearing you talking. I can remember, my kids were at one point all 3 in diapers, and because my oldest was quite stubborn. And I didn't go anywhere. And when I did, it was like, and my kids are pretty good, but you know how just society in general, like, your baby is crying, it's like, can you please shut that baby up? Or, you don't feel comfortable even nursing your child in public, or it's just motherhood itself then is almost attacked. Like, you feel attacked as a mother, even just being with your children in public sometimes. And so I think that just adds to the grief of that feeling of And resentment, right? I think it just breeds resentment in a lot of ways. I'm pretty sure it did for me as
Yeah.
I think back.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel unsupported. A lot of moms feel unsupported. And, I think all of this is ripe for change. But I know that, these are some of the pitfalls that people experience, especially with those little ones. And, it's like all the responsibility is on you for everything that goes wrong, right? But there's no support, there's no help, there's no, like, I think a lot of us get lost in that feeling. And again, for me, I would not roll back the clock at all. Being a mom has been one of the most powerful, transformative experiences in my life, and what's been the catalyst for the work that I do now. And I work with, in my work, I do a lot of work with parents, because for me, a big part of my own personal and spiritual journey came from that parenting dance, and from, learning about myself, doing a lot of my healing work from being a mom and being a parent. And so I love to support other people that are interested in using the journey that way as well. So I'm so glad that I took this, and I love my kids too. There's that. But it can be really, really, really challenging. And again, there is that a lot of women, I think, do feel that grief, that loss of self. And then, of course, too, if you're grieving other things, if you're grieving the loss of a parent, if you're grieving a loss of things from your childhood, that will be activated too. Because what happens with our kiddos is, as they go through certain ages and stages, it often triggers stuff within us. And if we did not feel parented the way that we, was ideal for us, and no one was parented perfectly, because we live in an imperfect world, and it's just, you're not going to, no parent, even, the bestest one, is not going to get it 100% right. So that stuff comes up for us as well. And that can be triggered too, with, when we come to the table of parenting our own kids. So while that can be a complicated process, I also like to look at it as an amazing opportunity for healing and growth.
I 100% agree. My kids have been a mirror for me.
Yeah, they
And
do that. And if you
yeah,
recognize it, you get so much more out of it, and you're a more effective parent too.
right. But it wasn't, I couldn't see it when they were little. And,
Yeah.
and so I look back with regret in that regard. And I try not to. I'm working on, forgiving
Yeah,
myself for that.
it's a good
But
idea, but it takes time.
it does. It's layers, right?
Yes, ma'am.
What did that experience for you when going through, at the time when you found that intuitive healer and you started to unpack that, what she shared with you, and your parenting, like at the same simultaneously,
Yeah, it was
like
all
what?
at the same time, and a lot of it. One thing that I had recognized is that I'm an empath. So empaths are people that feel what other people are feeling, like it's happening to them. And so they're highly sensitive souls. They're very compassionate souls. There's more people opening up now to their empathic gifts than ever before, because we are in a point of planetary transformation. And so a lot of people are, awakening up to things that, 5 years ago would not have been an option for them, but it's just everything's accelerated. But so empaths are just these really great feelers, and we have these big compassionate hearts. But the problem is, if you're not careful, if you're not aware, if you're not grounded, and you don't have scrupulous boundaries, a lot of empaths really feel that, like, if I can feel it, I'm supposed to heal it. I'm supposed to do something about it. And they can start taking on the pains of the world and become very overwhelmed, and also become confused about what's theirs and what's someone else's. And so that was sort of the story of my life. And I was getting all of this intuitive information from my empathic abilities, and also just because, like, basically all my intuitive channels were turned on at once, and it was just like TMI, like psychic TMI. It was too much, and I was overwhelmed all the time. And so I couldn't, find the pieces of gold in all of the flood of information. So for me, it was about learning about boundaries. It was learning about, with your kids, that real important thing about letting them be on their own damn journey, and knowing that they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to, like, get dinged up and bruised just like you did. And it's part of the process of life. And your job is not to take away their pain. And your job is not to keep them locked in a padded room. Your job is to support them on your journey. And the best way to do that is keep tuning into that inner guidance and saying, okay, they have a journey. It may not be the path that I would choose for them to follow, but that's not my choice. how am I being called to serve right now to support them on their journey? And sometimes the intuition, what our intuition tells us to do, is way different than what our mind thinks we should do. And so that was a big part of it, learning boundaries, learning about that. And as I started to learn to respect my kids on their journey, a magical thing happened, because I started to like respect my own journey and my own life and my own mistakes and the things that maybe didn't go so well in my life, where I could start to release those losses and have forgiveness for myself and the people in my world that maybe didn't show up for me the way I wish they had. And again, it was a process. It did not necessarily happen overnight. It can, it usually doesn't. But so it was just such a powerful journey. And then through all of that, I just kept hearing the call, from my intuition of what those next steps were. And I just kept following them. And one of those next steps for me was to pursue my counseling degree. And, I already had this doctorate in psychology as a research psychologist, but I didn't have the clinical training. And, my brain wanted me to go back and become a clinical psychologist, because that's like way more prestigious. But my heart said, no, you need to do this other thing. So I did that, and I got exactly the training that I needed. And, I've just been following those breadcrumbs one step at a time, because that's how our intuition speaks to us.
This is so in line with the conversations I've been having with my friends, books I've been reading.
Yeah.
This conversation couldn't be more timely. Thank you for sharing all of that. You have a quote on your website, and I wrote it down. And it says, "Our sorrows and wounds are healed only when we touch them with compassion."
Oh,
and
I said that?
Buddha said that.
Yeah.
Buddha said that, but it is on
there
your,
you go. That makes more sense. All right.
but it is on your website, and I wrote it down because it is beautiful. And so when you're doing this work how does your work as an intuitive counselor differ from other types of counselors?
Absolutely. First of all, I think anyone who's doing any kind of let me say that again. I think that anyone who's doing any kind of healing or helping work well, whether they recognize it or not, they're tuning into their inner wisdom, because that's where all the really amazing truth, wisdom comes from. And I think that, the more we can do that, the more effective we are in pretty much anything we do, but especially if you're in a healing or helping profession. And so I really encourage people in those fields to tune into your intuition more. And remember, a lot of the tools and trainings and things that we all learn in school, at some point, somebody had to think those up. And a lot of times, not always, but many of those were, intuitively guided things. And so, but for me, I wear my heart on my sleeve, so to speak, intuitively. And I'm really, I lead with that intuition. And so I have training, I'm trained in different modalities, but when I'm doing my counseling work, I always tune into my intuition first, and I let that be the guide. And then, of course, if my intuition tells me to use a particular strategy or a particular tool based on all the things that I've learned over the years, I will absolutely do that. But I lead with my intuition first, because I think that's where the gold is. And I think that the more we can tune into our inner wisdom, that's, and we didn't really talk about this yet, but for me, I believe that your intuition is your connection to your higher self. It's your connection to spirit. It's like the direct line to your soul. And when you can start to live your life from that place, oh my God, everything changes. And most of the people that come to me are people that, have signed up for this journey, and, they're really ready to get more than just sitting in a therapy room and like talking and staying at the level of the mind. They want that big, enlightening experience. And they really want to start to tune into their own inner wisdom. And they really want to start to live their life from a more soul-based perspective. So they are all for that. Occasionally, when I'm doing the counseling work, someone just finds me on Psychology Today, and, that's fine too, because I don't put the gifts away just, because people don't want to hear them. I can do it either way, but more and more people are coming for that full experience. And sometimes that's me just giving guidance, not giving advice, which would come from my mind and what I think people should do, but giving guidance, meaning I'm tuning into their highest wisdom and, and to their soul, their spirit guides, however you want to think about it. And I'm becoming a conduit for them to, hear the call of their soul. And that's a big part of what I do, both in counseling and in my, spiritual coaching work. And that's like one of my favorite things to do. And sometimes that guidance will give me tools and strategies that they can use. Sometimes, that will give me a particular, if it's in a counseling setting, a specific counseling modality that we might want to try. But again, I always lead with my intuition.
So what would you say to someone listening, a griever listening? We've talked a lot about like, tapping into your inner knowing and
Yes.
your higher self. And I've been really digging into all that stuff myself lately. What would you tell a listener, a griever listening,
Yes.
how to know and how to have the awareness as to what should their next step be if they're ready to get help? And yeah, I'll let you answer that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of questions embedded in that one little question. First of all, it's different for everybody, right? Because we are all beautifully, unique. And so what will work for you now in this moment of time is specific to you and only you. And it could change in a minute because the only constant in this world is change. So that said, in terms of seeking help, first of all, you'll know if you're uncomfortable, if you're feeling like, I don't want to sit with this anymore, I'm so ready, then please, move forward and get some support. And support can come in lots of different ways from in lots of different places. Sometimes we're afraid to kind of, and you get this a lot with therapy, and also with the intuitive work, where people don't, they're afraid that the answer will like destroy them, it'll be too much. So always trust your, I would be kind to yourself with those fears. Remember that a good therapist or a good helper is going to go with you gently. And that usually the thing that we don't want to open, the thing that we don't want to address, once we crack the lid and let it breathe, it actually gets better, not worse. Right? It's like if you ever like a really stinky pot and you just keep it closed and everything keeps festering, like the longer you keep the lid on, the grosser it's going to smell. If you take the lid off in a supportive and loving environment, maybe outside if it's a stinky pot, and let it breathe a little bit, then you can kind of get in there and clean it out. And so therapy works this way. And in terms of tuning into who to work with and how to do that work, always follow your intuition. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And so go where you feel drawn, go where you feel called, go where you feel safe and comfortable. And yes, there are always times when we're challenged and we feel a little bit like uncomfortable too. So you want to start from that place of comfort. So if something is uncomfortable, you have a relationship with somebody else who can hold that space for you. And you probably know this from the work that you do. Because we need to be comfortable, have a backdrop of comfort right before we want to start touching the uncomfortable. Okay,
Yes.
if that makes sense, or at least it's one way to do it. Some people just like to rip the Band-Aid off and dive into the acid bath and do it that way, but that's just not how I work personally. I'm all about, being comfortable. And the other thing that comes through, and I'm sure you've addressed this before in your podcast, but it's coming through to share now, grief comes in many different ways and many different forms, and it's different for everyone. And, it can be the loss of a cat. It can be loss of an identity. It can be the loss of a significant loved one. It can be so many things. And, grief happens to us all the time throughout the lifespan because, again, the only constant is change. And so we're always shifting and growing. And, those grief moments are just so right for our own personal and spiritual development. And if you can hold yourself through them and get support and, come to that experience with as much consciousness as you can muster in that present moment, it's an amazing opportunity for your spirit to shine and for you to actually get to a place of experiencing even more joy. And the word that comes through is enlightenment in your life.
So much goodness in there. Let's see. I got to think about where I want to take this next. I'm going to have to edit this part out. I'm the editor.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say then to someone who feels like, well, you know what? Yeah, I have grief, but I also have trauma.
Yes.
had traumatic experiences happen to me. How does that change their grieving experience? Identifying if they're so in that identity of probably more of a victim, I suppose, if you've had like traumatic experience
Right.
versus grief of, a loved one or something. You may not feel like a victim as much. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
I
want to
think,
compare because that's not what we do in grief recovery work. We don't compare
right.
losses, but just the word trauma in itself.
Right. First of all, loss is always traumatic, right? It's very rare to have any kind of loss where there isn't a little bit of trauma. And trauma is something that sometimes, we think of trauma as big things like being abused or, being in a car accident or losing a loved one and those things are definitely traumatic, but we get traumas all the time, big and small throughout our life. And for me, trauma is anywhere where, the outer world doesn't match your inner magnificence. And as a spiritual being in human form, which I think we all are, there's a lot of opportunities for those little dings and bruises to happen over the course of our life. And, so trauma can be like, I don't know if we discussed this example before, but what comes to mind is, you're 4 years old and you're at the toy store and you really want that toy fire truck, and mom, rather than just saying, no, I'm sorry, honey, we have to wait for Christmas, shames you and says, well, you shouldn't want that. And that's too much money. And like, you're a greedy little child to ask for that. See, that's really traumatic. And we have those experiences, unfortunately or fortunately, all the time throughout our life. And so, when we talk about trauma, it's important to realize you might have trauma that you don't even realize because you're not identifying those things as traumatic experiences when in fact they can be. But we also know, in the clinical literature that people that have had a lot of what we call big T traumas or a lot of little T traumas, fire truck is a little T trauma, a rape is a big T trauma, but they're both equally traumatic in their own special ways. Those people can have more complicated grief. Where, a grieving loss just stirs up a lot of other kind of trauma. And, I often say that trauma is the gift that keeps on giving, meaning that we have many opportunities to keep working on it again and again through our life because it will often become re-triggered and we will become re-traumatized. And, from the perspective of someone who's suffering, this seems like a bad thing. But again, it's from a spiritual perspective, it's just your soul giving you more opportunities to explore the issue so that you can grow. And it's really a beautiful thing because you're able to explore that from different perspectives until eventually you're able to find peace with it. And that's to me what the healing process really is. It's not to be forced, but eventually we start to find peace with these losses and peace with all of our human experiences. And it can take you, 10 minutes. I don't know anyone for whom it's taken 10 minutes, or it can take you, 12 lifetimes. But that's the ultimate, goal, I think, for most of us.
I want to get your thoughts on something because I read something today and it really struck me. And I think it's something that's going to stick with me. And it's often something I've wondered, but I never really we read something in the perfect timing.
Right. Always.
So I want to get your perspective of this. So I read that, so people will say, well, do you have to suffer in order to grow? And then what I read was that by our own thoughts, we attract suffering. Like we put ourselves in positions and situations and circumstances. It's like an addiction to suffering.
Yes.
And one thing that I struggled with for over 30 years was feeling as though I'm just here to suffer.
Oh.
Because I've suffered for so long, like just in my own mind and my own thought process, in my just, all these different things. And it's like, why do these things keep happening to me over and over? And so I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
All right. So for you specifically, if you don't mind, what I would say is if you can shift that belief system, you're already shifting it. So it's kind of a done deal, but maybe someone else who has that belief system will want to hear this. to, understand that life is happening for me, not to me. And again, doesn't mean that you have to like it. It doesn't mean that you can't be pissed. Please have whatever feelings that you're having, because that will help you release that belief system. But yeah, if we have a belief system that life is about suffering, or that things are happening to me, meaning life is torturing me, life is against me, life is not against you. There's a higher part of yourself that planned every damn experience you have in your life for your own learning and growth, to help you remember the magnificence of who and what you really are. And is suffering necessary on that journey? No. Is it the way that most of human life has worked up until now? Yeah. And, if we go back to Buddhists, because we quoted the Buddha earlier, what the Buddha would say is suffering is a mental construct. It's all in your mind. It's how you approach life. And you create suffering by the way that you approach your life, and the thoughts that you have, and your resistance to that deep flow of life, and just the fact that things are happening as they're meant to happen. And again, a spiritual bypass here would be to say, well, I have to be happy with everything. No, you are human, my friend. And so it's more about, being kind and sitting with that humanness, while at the same time holding that broader perspective. And so, yes, when we get into that victim mentality, if that's all we think we are, and we just think life is just here to kick my ass, and this is how it goes, and I don't deserve more, and we become resentful of it, this can keep us stuck in more crap happening for us and more misery. But the way out of that is not to kick yourself over the head even more. The way out of it is to just notice, oh, wow, this is, of course, I would think this way given my life experience and everything I knew up until now. And of course, now I'm starting to see glimmers that there could be something else. And let me follow that. And let me be as kind as heck to myself in that process as I explore this, and I allow that new awareness to come in for me. And then it will, I promise, every single time.
Well, you hit on something. I don't know if you said it exactly, but like for me personally, like gaining new knowledge, new tools, just following my intuition of what I needed to read, what I needed to experience, what I needed to,
Yes.
like, I've drawn people, circumstances, books, things to my life that I've needed to
Every time.
get to a level of awareness that I
Yes.
have now about my emotional inner climate, I like to call it.
And everything happens in divine timing. So you will always be led to those things at just the right time. And then the more you're open to it, and the more you start following, and the more you start listening to the inner wisdom, and they usually come as breadcrumbs. It doesn't usually come the way your mind would like it, like the complete answer all at once for the next 50 years, right? They're usually little glimmers of try this, follow this. Maybe you should go talk to that person. Maybe it's time for you to go visit your uncle, right? I mean, that was a profound experience that you had. But when we start following and listening to these inner nudgings, they get louder, because we start to agree to, co-create our lives with our inner wisdom. And so more and more you will be guided, and more that guidance will lead you to a place of calm and peace and center. And if there are struggles to be had, they'll be, streamlined for just the ones that you need to get the most, bang out of your buck. And our inner wisdom will also show us how to navigate those life struggles, which everybody has, the best way possible.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Gosh,
Yay.
I'm loving this conversation. What would be one thing that either others did or that you found was helpful for you when if probably just maybe before you found that intuitive counselor? Or no, it was a doctor, intuitive doctor, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I found a lot
Yeah.
of people, but yeah, before that particular experience, I think there was a period where it was really helpful for me to connect with other people that were going through the same thing that I was, and having that same story, and, feeling those losses. And I think that can be really important for people to feel heard by other people that are having a similar experience. But I also think that you don't want to get some people, that's where they get stuck. That's where they get lost. Their identity becomes, I'm the one who's had trauma. I'm the mother who has lost her sense of identity, or, or I'm the person, I'm the motherless child, right? And so we want to be really careful about the identities that we take on, because once we identify with something, it becomes locked. It becomes part of our false sense of self, and it can keep us from growing and changing and continuing to align with our highest guidance and growing in this human container. So that was really helpful for me to feel heard. But I also think, and to know that I wasn't alone in this, but then there was also those other people that were starting to show me the way out of it and to show me the way through it. And that's a different thing. And so we just don't want to get kind of locked into our pain stories. But again, that pain just wants to be heard. And for me, in that earlier phase of my journey, it was just so validating to have people go, yeah, of course you feel this way. And reading books about other moms that had felt that was really empowering and powerful and helped me not feel like I was alone, which is, I think, something a lot of people really want and need.
And that I try to bring hope in the work that I do. Like
Yeah.
when I'm communicating, I want, like, there is another side to this. If I can find it, so can you. I mean,
Absolutely.
I've heard just terrible stories of how people found in the work that I do, grief recovery, and how it's changed and transformed their lives. But I see it though on social media too. It's where it's almost like sometimes, like when you, like traditional grief support groups where there's no action, where it's like you said, you're just
Yeah.
kind of repeating the same story. I see that a lot online. It's almost like a support group, but it's online.
Yeah. And it can be like after, and it's interesting because a lot of people I've worked with through grief and particularly loss of loved ones will say, or sometimes I work with a lot of special needs parents too. So that's another form of grief where you're grieving the loss of the child that you thought you were going to have. And every parent goes through that a little bit because, if we're paying attention, our kids are not the idealized things that we imagined they would be before we had them. But when you have a special needs child, that's even, or a chronically ill child, that can be even more so. And people will say oftentimes, those support groups, they can feel so good at first, but oftentimes if people are paying attention, at a certain point, they're like, I'm done with it. It's over. I've gotten as much as I could get from this. Now I'm ready for something more, because they don't want that to be their story for life. I'm the mom of a special needs child, and that's going to be it forever, right? We want to be heard through our human experiences, but we also want that flexibility to grow and change and know on the highest spiritual level, and this may or may not resonate with your listeners, but I'm going to say it anyway, none of that's who you really are. That's just the little cloaks that you're wearing through various times of your human experience. And so I think that is super important, that, you don't get lost in that.
I actually I'm like, yep, amen. I resonate with that. And I like to look at grief as like a veil that we wear. And
Right.
You can't see the mirrors in front of you because you have a veil, and you can't see yourself when you look in the mirror either.
Right. But you don't have to wear that veil forever if you choose not to. When you're ready, just like other kind of grieving, right? It's fine to take that off. And it's not a disservice, especially when you're grieving loss of another human, of a loved one. It's not a disservice to your loved one to move forward, right? And we didn't talk about this yet, but it's my belief that when we die, we go back to spirit form. We don't go away. The soul is eternal. And I believe this mostly because I have that ability to connect with entities, beings, and spirits that are not in a physical form. And so that has been very validating to me through my own experience. But our loved ones, they want us to be happy. And, sometimes, especially when it's been a complicated human relationship, and sometimes, we have that where we lose someone, but that relationship wasn't perfect. And sometimes when they die, we either think we have to pretend like it was perfect to honor their passing, or, worse yet, we can't ever process our losses now or our grievances now because they're gone. Neither of those things are true. You can continue to do your work even with those deceased loved ones after they're out of their bodies. And in the work that I do, I often see that happening. And I sometimes see our deceased loved ones showing up to facilitate that work that we still need to do, because they often have a broader perspective once they're not encumbered by their human the word, I don't know if it's coming through, fallacies, frailties, whatever. We don't always see things perfectly crystal clearly while we are still in human form. So we can continue to work on stuff after our loved ones have passed. We can say everything that we wish that we had said to them when they were living, when they're deceased, and they will hear us. And they will often hear us without the same defensiveness that they might have hurt us when they were in human form. So sometimes it's advantageous that, we wait till they're past to work through some of this stuff. And, honoring a relationship and honoring someone is honoring them in their human imperfection. So it's okay if you have mixed feelings about someone who's passed. You can still love them. They can still love you, even if all of the details of that human relationship were imperfect.
Oh, this is so good. I'm so glad that we connected.
Oh, thank you.
And I believe too, as a kid, I saw my dad in his casket, and as a kid, I just, there was no conversation about death or grief or anything. And so, he was put in the ground, and I thought that's what happens when you die, you're put in the ground. And I didn't have, never felt that spiritual connection. I never felt a spiritual connection to a higher being, or much less to myself, until probably 2014.
Yeah.
I mean, it just took me so long to come around. And
it's
what would
normal.
Yeah. Go ahead.
To say this, it's normal and natural too. Sometimes we look back in our lives and we think something's wrong with us because it took us so long. Again, remember divine timing. And we get the memo at just the right moment. And sometimes I'm someone who is a late waker up in a lot of sense. And that's okay. That's beautiful, because I needed every experience that I had in my life to get to where I am now. And I'm grateful to everyone. And you can't force that kind of feeling. I just feel it naturally, but just know that that's there, that, every experience that you've had in this human life is supporting you to this moment now, whether that feels right or not. And, there's no, it's the human mind that wants to say there's a particular timeline. There isn't. And we need every experience that we have, and it's perfect. Timing, whatever's happening now is exactly what's supposed to be. So I hope that helps.
No, and I can say that now.
Yeah.
I fully believe that now, and I do feel a higher connection to myself and to,
but you can't force it, right? You need the experience to get you to that place. And if you said probably to yourself, 20, 30 years ago, listen, babe, this is the way you have to see things, you probably would have thrown a drink in your face, right? Because you weren't ready.
I would have been drunk.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that particular image came through. Sorry for that. That's how the intuition works.
Well, my life was a train wreck. So that very much was my story.
Right. But in life, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's been a long track.
Right. And again,
that hasn't been straight.
Yeah. And it's not meant to be. And we often learn through these human experiences, and you'll be able to carry forward. And I'm sure you already do in the work that you do, that understanding that, even the train wreck can serve you. It can serve you, and it can get you there. And again, no part of human life is wasted, and human experience is wasted. It's just our human minds that judge everything. I'm just going to need to get a drink of something. So hang on.
Sure.
This is a lot of chatting for me.
I'm just writing down your quote.
Thank you.
Let's see. What was the other question? I realized too that I asked the same question kind of twice, just differently. Choose which question. Yeah. I'm like,
I did a whole episode with someone, and every question I asked her was the same answer. It's a good episode, but for 45 minutes, she's like, well, yeah, that's kind of the same answer as before. And I was like, but I think that's what we all needed to hear that day. So don't worry about it.
No, but on this form, I asked the same question kind of twice. So I just realized that today. I got to change because I wanted.
I didn't think you asked me the same question twice, but if you did, I think we got different answers.
No, because I think it's equally important to know. Okay, I'll start again. So what would you say is probably unhelpful things that people can do for themselves or others who are looking to support others And grief in particular, and maybe trauma as well. Grief,
I
trauma,
love
it's
that
all
question. Such a
together,
good
right?
question. Yep. Uh, Unhelpful, judging yourself, judging how you're having the experience, judging yourself for judging yourself if you have that level of awareness, right? Because it's going to be different for everyone, and whatever you're feeling right now is just perfect for you, and judgment's going to shut down the process. The other thing that can sometimes be unhelpful, both for yourself as others, is like that kind of, spiritual bypassing kind of deal where you're like, I should feel grateful. I should feel happy. I should focus on the positives. I should. There's no shoulds in the land of grieving. There's no shoulds in life really that serve us. It should is judgment in disguise. And, again, you have to have your experience, because Earth is an experiential realm. We learn here by being human. So be kind to yourself. Know whatever you're experiencing is just right. If you have trouble being kind to yourself, seek support, find someone else to teach you and to be kind to you in the meantime. And also it comes through to say, don't try to go it alone, right? A lot of times we believe that we got to do everything ourselves, and that if we don't do it ourselves, it's not good, it's not right. But Earth is a shared realm. This is a shared journey. And so, it's important to allow yourself to find and connect with significant others, be it friends, be it healers, be it helpers. And you don't want to give your power away to those folks, but you do want to know that you don't have to do it alone, and there's support at every leg in the journey. And if you open yourself up for it, it will always come. Could be a book, could be a podcast, could be in lots of different places, whatever your comfort zone is. But, be open to the fact that if you are open to that, support will always be there for you, and you deserve that.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
That was my experience. What would you say to someone listening to, and I'm just as curious, how to connect with a departed loved one, and then
Okay.
how to know when you are?
Oh, I love that question. Okay. So connecting with your loved ones is a little bit like connecting with your intuition. And the first thing I'm going to say is, look, if you talk to your loved one, they hear you. Okay. And even if you're mad at your loved one, don't worry about that. Because again, they don't hear you with their ears like they did in human form. If you had some grievances with your mom and now she passed away and you're bitching at her, you're not going to get the same response back that you did when you were both in bodies. And if you do that, I promise you, is your mind. Your mom is passed over. She's not in that realm of bitching back at you. And I hope that word was okay. If not, I can say it again in cleaner language. But so that's the first thing. So, but you can always talk to your loved ones. They always hear you. Sometimes we have this feeling, right? If we don't hear back right away, or they left us, because we have that deep sense of loss and we feel that they're not here and they're not there. They're always, even if you can't feel them or see them or connect with them, if you send it out there, they'll get the memo. Okay. So know that first and foremost, that you can always talk to them. And then if you imagine them talking back and that voice is loving and kind, it is probably them. If again, they're sounding like they're beating you up or telling you how terrible you are, or that's probably the voice in your head. Because, when our deceased loved ones move back into spirit form, they're not so judgy anymore. They're not like perfected yet. So again, sometimes when people talk about spirit guides and they're like, it's got to be my Aunt Marge. And I'm like, she may be looking over you, but your spirit guides actually are, guidances of even higher levels, that they've transcended the need to be in human form altogether. But like once we leave the human body, we do have a broader perspective. And so, you'll feel a loving, kind energy. So know that you can talk to them, know that they're listening, know that you're probably not imagining it. 9 out of 10 times you're not imagining it. Oftentimes our loved ones will show us signs in the environment, and people just know. And if it brings you pleasure to think that, every time you see a bird, it's your mom, coming back to say hello. And then just go with that, don't overthink it. Like, enjoy that. It's beautiful. And by the way, if you have that thought, then you're helping your deceased loved ones find a way to connect with you, which is what they want to do. So, if you believe that the birds are that way, even if they didn't get that idea yet, they'll start doing that for you anyway. They'll be like, oh, okay, that's how you want me to communicate with you. I'll be a bird. So it's magical. And you asked one other question. I'm trying to find that in my brain. So hold on. Oh, you didn't ask this, but this also comes through. And another way that our loved ones love to communicate with us is in our dreams. because when we are in the sleep state, our minds are quiet and we're much more receptive. So if you dream that a loved one came and gave you a hug, or I used to always dream about my grandfather, that he was like still alive. And then I'd be like, well, wait, he's dead. I recognize now those were times that he was visiting me in my dreams and just saying hello.
I don't recall ever having one of those dreams,
Well,
but
it's different for everyone, but I'm
yeah,
sure
like
some
you
of your
said,
listeners
it's
have had those dreams. Yeah.
yeah, it'll
And
be
sometimes we
different.
have a sense too, right? That our loved, I mean, if there's a lot of unfinished business, that our loved ones can't hear us, if they're not here, that they're not, why aren't they speaking to me? That's a sign for you to heal your own grief and that place of feeling abandoned by them, or whatever feelings came up at the time of the loss. Because they are there, and sometimes healing that too will help you make that connection. And it's important to know too, and I hope this makes sense, that everyone's on this human journey, and when we leave our bodies, we continue with a little bit of school about processing and unpacking what went on in our human life. And so you here on earth, when you are working through whatever grievances or traumas or issues that you have with that loved one, will help them on their journey as well. And so, someone that leaves their body too soon or leaves their family too soon, like they may go out thinking like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me that I can't stick around and support my family? And the family might get the memo, oh my gosh, this person left me too soon. They abandoned me, right? Like as you work through your issues, they'll work through theirs as well. And all of those things are ultimately misbeliefs, because at the end of the day, again, everything happens exactly as it should, but it doesn't always feel that way, and it doesn't have to.
I can speak from experience, and when I was with my uncle, I felt the most connected to my dad than I ever had.
Because he very
since
much,
the day he had died.
And I hope, again, you have a good editor if you don't want this in the podcast, but that's because it was your dad prompting you, because he had unfinished business with that family line, and he really wanted, before your uncle passed, for you to be the conduit of reconnecting all of you guys back together. And he wanted to help you with that. For him, it was important for him, it was important for your uncle, and it was important for you. So he was very much prompting you and guiding you, and he says, good job at listening, and he loves you.
Came through?
Just a little. But I think the longer conversation would be for another day in another context.
I'm just like, well, I got chills, but
yes. Okay. And see, that shows for listeners another way that you would know. Chills are an amazing body signal. When you feel that in your body, chills is one of my favorite intuitive markers, Victoria, because you can't make it up, right? You can't make that up. When we feel the chills, it's like, oh my God. And I have a colleague and friend, she gets the chills for me. Like whenever we're together and I ask her something, she'll be like, chills, chills. And it's like it's so validating. So yes, that's another way that you'll know. It's sometimes you'll have that full body experience that you can't make up. And that's a marker that yes, he did come through and he's around you all the time. And sometimes it's our own grief that blocks our ability to connect with our loved ones and to know that they're there and to feel their love. But that's okay too. It's all part of the process.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
What I've been learning. And I actually got chills earlier in this interview. I didn't
Powerful
want to
intuitive
interrupt
marker.
you.
Pay attention to that. It's so powerful.
Oh man, this was so
Yay,
good.
thank you. It was a
Is
lot of fun.
Is there anything else that you feel the listeners need to hear?
Yeah, I think just that grief is a natural, normal part of life. And, sometimes we feel like we're the only one it's happening to, and that it's happening to us. Like there's something wrong with us for either the way that we're responding to the grief, or that, we had the loss in the first place, or, all of the above. Be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. Know it's a process of life, but it's not fun. It's not easy. But it's also can be, if you take the challenge, an amazing conduit to transformation and growth. And and in that, it's a really, really good and powerful thing. and that nothing in life, like we said before, is wasted. And so it's the more that we bring the light of consciousness to our human experiences that we can grow and change and transform.
Amen. I agree.
Yay.
So good. So if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
All right. So I have a couple of different things going on. I do one-to-one sessions with folks all over the world, and also intuitive counseling sessions in Connecticut, where I'm a licensed professional counselor. And to do either of those things, you would find me at my website, which is victoriashawintuitive.com. So pretty easy, my name plus the word intuitive.com. And then I also have a lot of free offerings and teachings that I love to do. On my website, I have, this is not free, it's a paid course. I have a paid course on activating your intuition, which is a self-paced online course with some tools and strategies to help you leverage the power of your inner wisdom and tap into your intuition more. I also have a podcast, which that is completely free, Intuitive Connection podcast, where I talk all about tools and strategies to awaken your intuition and all topics, intuition and spirituality. Plus I have a lot of amazing, amazing guests. And I've also started doing some fun readings on the show, which has been really cool as well. Because oftentimes, we hear ourselves through other people's stories. And let's see what else. I have a pretty active presence on Instagram. Victoria Shaw Intuitive is my handle, and on Facebook. And I am in the process of building an amazing Facebook community, Intuitive Connection community, where I've been doing a lot of free teachings, weekly readings, and visits with all of the guests from our podcast episodes. So that is a really fun place to find me as well. So that's Intuitive Connection community on Facebook. And I think that covers it.
Lots of places to find you. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast. And I have no doubt that what people needed to hear came through today.
Yay.
And that it'll be beneficial.
Thank you.
I really
this was
enjoyed
a joy. Thank you.
It was
my pleasure and my joy as well. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, if you love this episode, I would love for you to give Victoria Shaw's episode a 5-star review once it's live. And tune in next week for another episode. And until then, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.